Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste and welcome to today's 10 p.m. show. You've got a very interesting topic lined up for you. And we also have a very eminent personality to dissect two personalities for you. Welcome, Shri Bharat Gupt ji. Welcome, sir.
Namaste to everybody. I am happy to be in your show once again. Such a pleasure.
And I start today's show with 4 short tales. These 4 short tales would probably contextualize what we are trying to show. And actually, this whole thing runs into the family. Sitaram Goelji narrated an incident when he had first gone to listen to Pandit Nehru around about 1931 or 1932. And he narrates this incident. He says that, when we had all gathered, and that what happened was that as soon as Pandit Nehru got up and he was there in front of the mic failed. And he got so incensed that he actually gave a slap to one of the workers standing there. And then he shouted at the top of his voice. And when he shouted at the top of his voice, at that instant, the mic started functioning. So everybody could hear what he was saying. And he said, and I repeat, in chaste Urdu, that is, of course, he only knew Urdu. He did not know Hindi because Hindi was the language of the plebeians. So he said, "Ye दिल्ली कांग्रेस के कारकुन ये सब नामाकूल हैं, कमीने हैं, रजील हैं." Well, this was Pandit Nehru, circa 1932. And now, of course, we have 2 very recent instances when the great grandson of that self-same worthy gets up in the parliament and makes a lot of drama and theater. I think since you're so closely associated with theater, you would have appreciated those gestures, the way he was acting in the parliament. And then he said, when he was told that you're supposed to make a speech on the budget, what are you doing? Yes, I'm coming to the budget. I'm coming to the budget. मैं आ रहा हूँ, budget पर आ रहा हूँ. And then he continues in that grandiose fashion, and finally he says that I'm not going to talk about the budget. Well, so that's his contempt for the little parliamentarians. He stands above them all. And one of the most wonderful things that I have seen is, I think yesterday, and that video went viral when a chief minister of a union territory made complete fool of him, and he could not even understand what was happening. At one woman, when she was, he was doing this public interaction, and the woman was asked to say something, and she wanted to say something. She was allowed to say something, and she shouted at the top of her voice, and she was manifestly angry. Anybody could have seen the anger in her voice, even if one did not understand the language. And she said in Tamil that this chief minister who was standing there beside you, this man did not visit us when we were hit by the cyclone and we were needing every kind of succor and help. And the chief minister translates it very politely without batting an eyelid. He says that they are saying that I went to them when there was a cyclone and I took care of them. This gentleman doesn't understand a thing. Clueless, as usual. And then there is the great granddaughter. What does she do? And the whole country is seething in anger at the violation of the national symbols, the sacrilege that took place on 26th of January. And she chooses to visit the one person who's supposed to have died, according to the woke liberals, by a gunshot wound which of course has its source only in fiction. And she goes and visits them in Rampur, and actually nobody really takes care, and everybody condemns it, all right-thinking people, except their own woke liberal cabal. So these are the four little tales which put the context to what we are going to discuss: the psychoanalysis, the great Anglo-Saxon or
And
Anglo-Kashmiri heritage that is supposed to rule over us, what is called lesser mortals. Sir.
yes, thank you for this opportunity to come in your show and talk about a grave problem. You see, it is not a small problem, it is a grave problem that we have today. And the graveness of the problem is signified by a ruling class which is getting more and more distant from the reality of the nation, from the ground reality, from the change that people are undergoing, from all that has happened in last 70 years, from the big challenges that have come now to the doctrine of socialism, which was actually license permit Raj, if I am allowed to say that. And also the great challenges that have come to what was called secularism, which was nothing but ethnic appeasement, जातिवादी संतुष्टिकरण जिसको हम कहेंगे. So all the big changes that have taken place, this Anglophonic class is totally oblivious to. Uh, till 5 years ago, that is for about after 1 year of the new government, that is Narendra Modi coming into power, I thought that the Congress party would take some time to understand the change that has taken place. And perhaps they were not willing to talk about it. They do understand, but they don't admit. But now I am convinced that unfortunately they do not understand. They really have no clue. And the reason they have no clue is because they have lived in a world which is the world of the Anglophones, which is so far removed from the Indian reality that they are not capable of seeing what has happened to them. So, this is the reality. Now, one of the things which is very peculiar to our country and what is happening right now is that without any impunity, Rahul Gandhi uh, thinks that he has the prerogative of abusing the prime minister. I mean, he just called him a coward last week, which would have been very, very shocking, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. But now people are quite used to such kind of a language emanating from him. So he called him a coward, and he goes on saying whatever he feels like. Now, the question is that a strategy? Is that just something which you can really repeat again and again and and pull down the image of Narendra Modi ji? It is clear to anybody that the effect is the opposite. And if the effect is the opposite, if calling him Maut ka Saudagar, if calling him all kinds of names, beginning with that famous chai wala thing, which emanated from Shankar Ayer, if that all has an opposite effect and it becomes actually a joke all over the world, then still you continue with that tragedy, with that strategy, if it is a strategy. then either you have a wrong strategy or you have something wrong with your fundamental way of thinking. And I think it is the latter. It is the fundamental way of thinking. They are not able to understand that this kind of behavior is something which is not acceptable to the country. Now, you see, uh, something that quite a few of my foreign friends have told me when they visit India, and these are very sympathetic people who have told me this, that they see that Indians are very often, if they are bureaucrats, they're shouting down at their juniors, they're shouting down at, let us say, a middle level clerk or certainly at a lower division clerk. And sometimes they even at somebody who is just one notch below them in the hierarchy. And this is done as a matter of routine. So they ask me, how does this happen here? It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. It doesn't happen in Europe. It doesn't happen in America or even in Africa. Then how does it happen in India? And I think the answer is this, that we have inherited from the British this kind of behavior which we have emulated. And we think that this is exactly an instrument of governance. You see, this shouting down, upbraiding, pulling up, this is considered to be an instrument of governance. And this comes as an imitative habit from the British Raj and the Anglophonic class of this country, which goes to schools like Doon School or Sinawar or most of these Anglophonic schools, which teach you the superiority of the English language. And then you come up to some very elite colleges like St. Stephen's College and Presidency, which used to be a college once. And then you belong and you think that you are a class. And while you are in that class, you also develop this habit of talking about the Brahminical caste system of India. You talk about how tyrannical were the Brahmins, whereas you are far more tyrannical to the ordinary people of India all that time. And you think that you have a right to shout down everybody else. So, this is primarily the habit, which seems to be the habit of the Congress party more than any other party. There can be individuals in other places, but I think as a class, this thing is the root cause. And that is why there is so much isolation. Now, this has reached a point of tragedy. From being something which was to be noted, from the point where it was criticized, now it has come to the point of being tragic. Why? What is so tragic that is happening? And the tragic is that our leaders of the Congress party are indulging in a jargon which is emanating from somewhere else, from somewhere outside the country. Either it is the jargon of the liberal left, or it is the jargon from across the border, east or west. And this is the tragic situation. And this is something which has become a very serious cause of concern for thinking people. As a matter of fact, it has brought our country to a very sad pass. So I think we should now understand that it is high time to tell this whole class as a whole that this thing cannot go on. And you see, when they talk of the West or when they talk of the English language, they really don't talk about the good and the beautiful things of the West. I mean, there was a time when, let's say 50 years ago, when those who studied the English language, they studied Shakespeare and Milton and Keats and Tennyson, or even in my college days, people were studying Thomas Stearns Eliot. But now, I don't know what they read. Maybe Mills and Boons, maybe things like, something trash literature. So the West has become nothing which has been considered as close to anything classical of the West, not any intellectual or learned tradition of the West, but some kind of a blind, imitative race to just deny yourself, being Indian. And this is the culmination of a syndrome which probably began with uh, our Chachaji, with Jawaharlal Nehru, but now it has reached a tragic proportion. After all, Jawaharlal was a man of letters, all said and done. But I don't know how much of that can be said about those who have come after him in his family line. Yes.
Actually, you can see that in their general conduct everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, when they go on their jaunts, the way Rahul Gandhi treats India, that he is flitting in and out of the country every few days. And on most important occasion, where the party is struggling, or the party is in the middle of some kind of an agitation or some kind of a problem, Rahul Gandhi is always found in the foreign shores. And okay, of course, there are a lot of rumors also swirling around saying that, okay, that he goes mostly to plot against. But what is most incomprehensible is that for all his foibles, you couldn't say that Jawaharlal Nehru was actually anti-India. He was definitely, I would consider him I think romantic, or you could sometimes even call him foolish. I often call him strategically blind. So you could associate all these foibles with him. But with this gentleman and his sister, they seem to lack even the commonest common sense. Of course, I know the common sense is quite uncommon, but even the very basic common sense, which all normal people are supposed to have, and you would find this robust common sense, at least in our rural folks, very much. Even that they seem to lack, and that is how you'll find that, okay, they start doing this when they start doing their temple rounds when there is an election near in the heartland. Then you will find that this man is doing the circumambulation the wrong way. And is sitting down to do what is called the Jalabhishek in what is called the Muslim way. So this man is really quite an epitome of, I would say, all that is absurd in our life.
Well, Sanjayji, I would say that he seems to be an exaggerated version of something that has happened to the whole Anglophonic class in India. This Anglophonic class has entered what may be called the age of utter senility. You see, this Anglophonic senility has become an intellectual senility. And you find that this is taking place in so many of our institutions. And unfortunately, we have stopped being innovative. We have stopped adjusting ourselves to the new situation or to what needs to be done. And I would venture to say that this kind of refusal to be flexible, adjust, and reform has become a feature of the bureaucracy. It has become a feature of the judiciary. It has become a feature of the academics. It has become a feature of even those people who want to do business and who are not constrained by license permit Raj entirely as they were 20 or 30 years ago. The class, the boxwala class, so to speak, the business class, there seems to be a great urge to just imitate what is going on in Europe or America and not to do any out of the box thinking. Now, if this is the general prevailing atmosphere, then we'll certainly find some characters or some people who end up behaving in such an obtuse manner as the example you just gave.
I think you're right. Actually, what has happened, the West has also gone woke. And the people who do not have these faculties of discernment, so
Right.
they have blindly imitated the West. And we have seen what happened in the United States over the last 2, 3 years, what is
Exactly.
happening now. And they have got into some kind of a distorted lifestyle of wokeism, liberalism, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, rules of radicals, and all that stuff. It's become some kind of a big khichdi that they do not know what all is there. It's not just dal chawal. There are 100 other recipes mixed up. A melange, you could call it. Actually, melange is a positive term. This is something of a very, very destructive melange. So the people who do not have these faculties of discernment, they just blindly imitate them, and they become a caricature of themselves, except especially in such a deep civilization like India, where people still have their connect to the oldest Vedic civilization. So,
I think some kind of a very basic familiarity with what is the culture of the land is to be expected from any family or even an individual who claims to be an important member of the legislative class, and let alone that over and above, who would like to be a member of a leader of the national party. Now, when such things happen, that you don't understand some of the basic fundamental features of a civilization, then you project the image that you really do not belong to this place. And then it is very easy for somebody to point out that, yes, you don't belong because even your nationality, in cultural terms, is a very, very mixed affair. And you have not made any attempt to refine what you have inherited. You see, it is very good to inherit one or two or three or four cultures, languages, etc. But there should be an attempt to refine, to make it better, to bring it to a higher level. And then you have the advantage of where you are born and the advantage of certain other things that you inherit from your parents, whether from your father or from your mother's side. Now, when this thing is not forthcoming, then the person uh, is really seen as somebody not fitting into the national mainstream. I mean, that's how I look upon the whole thing.
right. Actually, I was reading a book. It's called Amethi Sangram,
Yes.
written by Shri Anant Vijay. I think it's a book worth reading. Why it is a book worth reading is because it gives you a great glimpse into the thinking pattern of these dynasts, and how they actually uh, come to this little god-forsaken place, and how they, when they even come to this place where which is supposed to be giving them the basis to be a politician and basis to be parliamentarian and the basis to be a leader of the land. When they come there, even there they cocoon themselves, and they only give access to people who are uh, fawning on them, or who are sycophants, or with whom they are comfortable. The general public, if it gets to meet them at all, gets to meet them through a filter, and they just make a grand show for the benefit of the television cameras, or for the benefit of the uh, journalists who are coming there, hearing that, okay, Priyanka ji's reached Amethi, or Rahul is going to Amethi. So it's just an event management kind of a situation. I it's an eye opener how for years and years and years this family kept treating this place Amethi as their fiefdom without caring for it even one little bit. All they did was that they would reach and they would, of course, roll money to the uh, middlemen who bring them votes, vote ke dalal, as we know, as we know in the rural landscape, in the hinterland, we have these vote ke dalal. So they would care only about the vote ke dalal, and this money would roll. Okay, they would spend 20, 30, 40, 50 crores on the eve of the election, win the election, go back and sit in the parliament, and then pontificate to the whole world, and just forget about these poor people who actually taken them to the parliament.
Well,
So,
this is part
yes, sir.
of the sense of entitlement uh, with which you are born, with which you are raised, and you feel that entitlement is there, unquestionable, and you don't have to work for anything. You don't have to maintain your status in real terms, because it is something which is like a zamidara, or something like a khillat of the Mughal Empire, something which will be there always and always. So it's entirely a feudal set of mind which acquired all these trappings of socialism, and of all these different kinds of jargons about garibi hatao, etc., which started right from Indira Gandhi. But in practice, it was the entitlement of the class. Again and again, it is the entitlement of the class and a few people, and those who would get closer and closer to that class would be the person nominated. That's why still you do not have party elections in the real terms, and that is why democracy is not sinking the roots, but as a matter of fact, the roots of democracy are drying up. And people from outside the country today have discovered various means of drying up those roots or poisoning those roots. Yes.
I think the way they are going, there doesn't seem to be any inclination of a look within, or even a sense of that they are doing any wrong. And in fact, you have seen that the royal dynasts actually disparage the people when they lose elections.
Yes.
They've done that a number of times. They told Amethi, this guy in this book only, the dynast told Amethi that, okay, that it is your problem, you rejected me. So now you have to, I will still look after you, but then you have rejected me. So your mistake.
That's true, and the whole effort to establish a proper and a true democratic system does not seem to be forthcoming, which is one of the primary responsibilities of those in opposition. You see, if in a democracy you talk of the duties of the opposition party, then the opposition party has to display and do certain things which the ruling party in practice has not been able to do. So, if you are able to do that better, if you are able to, for instance, have party elections better in the opposition party, then that's how democracy actually functions. And that's how democracy gets strengthened. But what seems to be happening is exactly the opposite. What we are seeing today is that others have acquired this entitlement syndrome in various parts of the country, following the entitlement which the Anglophones and the elite Anglophones are practicing for the past 70 years. And this is a big crisis in Indian political scene today.
Yes, and what artist has given rise to because of this complete cultural illiteracy, and of course, even a lack of IQ, is that what they have done is that they have imbibed the complete colonial narrative that was fabricated by the British for subjugation and control of the minds of the people. So they talk about their entire worldview of the Indian society is about caste, Brahminism, Aryan race, Aryan invasion, Adivasi tribal, Dravidian as a race. Then they also talk about India not having produced any science or mathematics or any literature. They go by Macaulay, who says that okay, that any British aristocrats, one shelf of a library is worth all the Sanskrit literature of the Orient of India. So these are the kind of what I should say. These are the kind of contempt narrative that not only these people have inherited, but they actually practice it in reality, and that is why they are always aching to enhance the fault lines that were created by the British.
Well, what has happened is that in repeating this kind of a narrative, they are not thinking at all. They are not even inventing or writing, even in terms of secondary or tertiary sources, anything new. They're taking the whole narrative from, let us say, a class of Indologists or sociologists or economists who are already there in Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford. So the level of intellectual subjugation is increasing decade by decade, or even every 5 years, you find that there is a greater dependence on scholars and writers who don't belong to India, who belong to some parts of the Western world, and who are dishing out a narrative which is being taken in. The whole narrative of ethnic diversity, as defined by the West for the sake of the West, has been taken in and is being practiced. We are seeing this in India again and again, and it is being applied in terms of social engineering, which is the big danger. And that is why I think we have to uh, totally demolish the colonial narrative and start talking about India in terms of what India has been in the last 5,000 years. And that is not just an idea of India. You know, most people talk about this idea of India as if the idea of India is something which an individual or a group can think about and then impose it on India. You see, this in itself is a very arrogant position, that I have an idea of India and I want India to fit into it. Instead of trying to understand what is India, instead of trying to discover what is India, instead of trying to serve what is India, I come up with an idea of India, and then I want the whole of India to fall in line with that idea. So it's part of, again, that kind of a fictitious colonial arrogance. And now we have reached the limit of this thinking. And what we are seeing is that certain very unexpected things are happening, that the descendants of those who believed in a very strong position uh, have just flipped. I mean, the latest example is the family of Bal Thackeray. The position that Bal Thackeray had is being repudiated. It's being torn apart by his own children. So there's this kind of cul-de-sac, reaching the dead end of the tunnel. This is the real problem, and I think some individuals typify it. And you can name those individuals, you can see those individuals very clearly in the country today.
Quite right. And you see this also in their interpretation of Christianity and Islam. The two, I should say, the two missionary religions, which are actually a threat not just to Sanatan Dharma, but they are basically a threat to the integrity of the country as a whole. But then they also have their own interpretation and their own trope of what they call communalism. And that is exactly what Jawaharlal Nehru had done. Jawaharlal Nehru, he accepted everybody from the Muslim League who did not go to Pakistan and called them secular, even though they had campaigned actively for the Muslim League and had even participated in the Direct Action Day. Even they were all taken in turn into secular, as if whitewashing happened in some kind of a washing machine, though there were no washing machines at that time. And all those people who had actually fought for a united India and who had staked their all in what became West Pakistan and East Pakistan and had to run back to the safety of Indian shores after partition, they were instantly turned into and branded as communal. And that whole thing continues till today. And
Yes,
nothing illustrates it better than that infamous uh, targeted Communal Riots Act that was formulated by this NAC, the National Advisory Council, which actually made the majority community communal by default. So
exactly.
that was a de jure position of a de facto narrative, or what this entitled ruling class actually thought of Sanatan Dharma. They think of it as some kind of backward, superstitious, and they consider the racist and deeply divisive Christianity and Islam as something great.
Well, the problem began with Jawaharlal Nehru because, in a way, he repudiated uh, Gandhiji in every way. If Gandhiji had Ram Raj, then Jawaharlal had some kind of an atheistic socialist model before him. If Gandhiji wanted people to retain their wealth, if he wanted that the capitalists of the country should act as trustees, I mean, whether that can happen or not, that's a different matter. But at least he had faith in the Baniya. He had faith in the Vaishya Varga. Uh, so Jawaharlal said that no, everything should come to the state. And he went to the extent of even persecuting certain business families very early after independence. So repudiation started, and the worst of it was, as you just mentioned, that those who were enemies of the country, they were considered as comrade in arms or makers of the new country. And that is a kind of syndrome where you actually surrender to the one who has just defeated you. So it was people who said that ladke liya Pakistan, hars ke lenge Hindustan. So it was exactly the same class which was patronized and which was encouraged, the same backward looking reactionary class which was considered as uh, worthy of being protected and given maximum concessions. And this, I think, is in itself a syndrome of defeat. And the country, I believe, still has to come out of it, and it has to establish the law of equality, that you can't have some people more equal than others. If everybody is equal, then everybody is equal. It's not possible that some people are more equal than others. That's how I think the problem exists.
I think time is now ripe to go into question and answers. Though, of course, I need to request our audience to start shooting some question and answer. Right now, we have very few. So, before we get some more questions, let me ask you something more on this very topic of how the cultural narrative was also vitiated. And we had this Progressive Writers Association, and we had this IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre Association. Almost all of these people were communists. Almost all of these people, especially all those who were Muslims, had actually participated in the Pakistan movement. People like Kafi Azmi and people like Kaf Banarsi, that guy who read that. Actually, it was लड़के लिया हंस के लिया है पाकिस्तान लड़के लेंगे हिंदुस्तान. It was the other way. Yeah,
Yes,
that was
yes,
Kaf Banarsi.
yes,
Kaf Banarsi. And all
right.
those people from the Barelvi sects who had actually given the uh, mass support to Jinnah to carry out his Pakistan project. Naimuddin
Yes,
Moradabadi, then the two sons of Ahmad Raza Barelvi, Hamid and Usman. All of them stayed back and
yes,
remained secular. And today you have a Ala Hazrat Express running from Bhuj to Bareilly. Can you imagine? I mean, all those who any self-respecting country would have thrown out as traitors were actually paraded on your head. Aligarh Muslim University, the sword arm of Muslim nation, according to Jinnah.
yes,
It
and
is a centrally funded university and it has 50% reservation from Muslims.
exactly.
Jamia Millia Islamia, which was a central university, was suddenly turned under the benign care of the UPA into a minority institution in 2011.
Exactly.
All this is happening, and there's not even a murmur. I think the Hindus, they seem to have imbibed all the, I should say, uh, the cowardice of 700, 800 years, and they seem to think that they are still Zimmis. What on
Yes,
earth is going on?
yeah, it is a defeatist syndrome, and the country has to come out of the defeatist syndrome. And there is a whole lobby within the country that would like that this syndrome continues. That we make uh, those who are people who are perpetrating a whole distortion about the motherland, they should continue and they should be allowed to speak and continue this kind of rhetoric with impunity. And this has to now, this has to go. It's plain and simple. This has to go.
Now let us go to the question and answers. And
Yes.
friends, whoever has any questions can now put it forward, because right now we have only 2-3 questions. And I request all the viewers to please like and share the video across all the platforms that you are on. Subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, and of course, shower us with your blessings in the form of contributions, questions and answers.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Isn't this effect of Ghayasuddin Ghazi? That is a canard floated by some people. Motilal Nehru's son was Gangadhar Nehru. So that's a, well, that's a phony trope. Forget about it. अनुज चौधरी, योग और ध्यान के बिना हिंदू सिर्फ नाम के हिंदू हैं, वो कांग्रेस के जाल में फंस जाते हैं। क्या समाज में योगियों के बढ़ने से विनाशकारी मानसिकता घटेगी?
You see, अब मैं इनको क्या हिंदी में जवाब दूं या
हाँ,
अंग्रेजी
बिल्कुल
में?
हिंदी में दीजिए। हिंदी में प्रश्न है तो हिंदी में उत्तर जाएगा।
तो देखिए क्या है, हमारे संस्कृति का एक बड़ा सीधा सिद्धांत है कि विद्याएं बहुत सारी होती हैं। हमारे यहाँ कलाएं हैं, आयुर्वेद है, ज्ञान विज्ञान है, दर्शन है, धर्मशास्त्र है। अब ये अलग अलग विद्याएं हैं, अलग अलग लक्ष्य हैं इनके। अब आप योग की जो बात कर रहे हैं या योगियों की जो बात कर रहे हैं, तो पहली बात तो ये देखनी होगी कि ये किस प्रकार का योग, क्या ये केवल आसन का योग है? आजकल मैं बहुत खुश हूं कि योग की चर्चा भारत में भी है और अब लाखों लोग योग कर रहे हैं और बड़ा अच्छा इसमें योगदान रामदेव जी और बहुत सारे हमारे योगियों ने, एक वही क्यों, बहुत सारे लोगों ने दिया है। लेकिन देखिए, योगासन के लेवल तक तो आपका शरीर अच्छा कर देगा, थोड़ा एकाग्रता पैदा करेगा। लेकिन जहां तक राजनीति की समस्याएं हैं, जहां तक समस्या समाज की ऊंच नीच की है, जहां तक समस्या इस बात की है कि आप समाज के अंदर अच्छा व्यापार नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, शासन नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, तो इन चीजों का जवाब आपको योगियों से तो नहीं मिलेगा। ये चीजें योग के द्वारा, चाहे योगासन हो, चाहे धारणा ध्यान समाधि हो, इन समस्याओं का समाधान तो आपको अर्थशास्त्र में मिलेगा, इनका तो शासन और नीति के ग्रंथों में मिलेगा। तो हमें भारतीयों को ये सोचना चाहिए कि भगवत गीता या कोई एक या दो ग्रंथ जो कि तथाकथित धार्मिक ग्रंथ हैं, वो हमारी सारी समस्याओं का निदान नहीं कर सकते। हमें अलग अलग विषयों के अलग अलग ग्रंथों का अध्ययन और उसके विशेषज्ञ और उसके अंदर काम करने वाले लोगों के हाथ में हमको जब एक ताकत देनी पड़ेगी जिससे कि वो समाज के अंदर सुधार कर सके।
Does Rahul Gandhi suffer from PTSD of Rajiv Gandhi's murder? That is post-traumatic stress disorder.
अच्छा अच्छा, अब इस पर तो देखिए ऐसा है, कोई डॉक्टर ही प्रामाणिक बात कह सकते हैं, मैं तो कुछ नहीं कह सकता। यानी ये तो एक बड़ा क्लिनिकल सा सवाल पूछा है आपने।
And this is not a question for a psychoanalyst. This is a question for a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
वैसे मैं इसमें ये थोड़ा सा ऐड कर सकता हूँ कि मुझे कुछ इसमें द बिहेवियर इज सो कंसिस्टेंट that it doesn't seem to come from the PTSD, because PTSD you gradually get out of after some time.
Yeah,
But the behavior is so consistent that it seems to be a fundamental flaw rather than PTSD. That is my what is called common sense understanding.
true, true. Yeah, next
Next,
question, please.
now this is done. Actually, okay. What you want to say is Rahul Gandhi is actually a blessing in disguise for Bharat.
You see, uh, sometimes it is said that a prodigal is a blessing in disguise, but the prodigal must come home. If there is no hope for the prodigal, if it is just a constant repetition of squandering away your energies, then it is not a blessing in disguise, but it is something else. It is a pain in the neck.
Right, right. The pain in the neck. Next. Okay, with their Parsi, Sanatani, and Italian background, have the Gandhi sanskars got too diluted and diffuse, retaining the good of none of these? I think they do not have any Sanatani background at all. And that you can see in the upbringing and the behavior of Jawaharlal Nehru. He
Exactly.
used the prefix Pandit only as an entitlement. And there's nothing of a Pandit in him. In fact, it's there on record. He said that, okay, I'm an Hindu only by accident, and culturally, I'm a Muslim, and by education, I'm an Englishman, and all those kind of things.
I think
So,
I would like somebody to inform me. I don't know. I would like to be informed on this, that if in the family of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, that is, did he have any ancestor who was a learned scholar, let us say in Sanskrit or Kashmiri language or poetry? Very often people coming from Kashmir have in their families people who know Tantra very well, or they have read something of Shaiv sector of Shaivism of Kashmir. So I would like you to inform me if there was somebody, maybe a great grandfather of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was learned in this kind of lore or this kind of textual knowledge. I mean, this is just a matter of interest.
we don't really know because grandfather was a police officer, and Motilal Nehru, of course, was an advocate, but he was a complete what is called a British toady, and his practice thrived actually on the cases of the royals. Basically, he was a very great favorite with the royals and the talukdars to fight their cases. And of
Yes.
course, we know about Nehru. The less said, the better. अमित पल्सरा मंत्रहीनश्च राहुलः शीघ्र नश्यन्ति न संशयः. Actually, it should be vinashyanti, not nashyanti. सर, क्या हमें परमात्मा का आभार मानना चाहिए कि पप्पू पैदा हो गया, और पप्पू का भी आभार कि उसने विवाह नहीं किया? क्या वाड्रा के बच्चे उत्तराधिकारी बनेंगे?
I think we should leave all these questions to time, because it may not be a wise man's job to make prophecy, on such matters. It's hardly anything to base your prophecy on.
Right, right. Okay, next question. Arjun Sharma. Jai Hind, sir. With a borrowed surname, does both of them have a perverse need to fulfill their vanity that when nation is concerned, they speak the tongue of a bankrupt businessman? Thank you.
Well, as we have been discussing, that is me and Sanjay ji, uh, there seems to be a very great incapacity to come to terms with reality, particularly the reality of India that is changing. Now, I shall like to put it very bluntly about this India that is changing. You see, very often it is said that India in last 6, 7 years is going towards Hindu nationalism, and that is not a very good change. And the whole secular lobby keeps harping on this. But what they don't understand is that this is not a political question. The change that has happened is very simply this, that for 70 years in the independent rule, you practiced a colonial strategy. The strategy was of making ethnographic minorities and giving them all kinds of concessions at the cost of the majority Hindus. And the second largest majority, the second largest majority, the Muslims, were called a minority at all India level. Now, what is happening is simply this, that the majority population of India, that is the 80% or 75% Hindus, they are simply saying that why are you doing this all at our expense? Why can there be no equality? Why does there have to be a practice of this appeasement to various kinds of minorities, real and manufactured? This is the big change that has happened. And this is a democratic change. This is not a change which some political jargon spouted by the BJP or the RSS has brought about in the country. This is a change because there is a huge middle class in India which is now more literate, which is now more well read, which is informed, and which is also making use of latest technology and is well aware of things. So they are asking for their rights. And if they are asking for their rights of equality, not at the expense of anybody else, then you can't accuse them of being Hindu nationalists. Now, I think this is a fundamental fact that people have to recognize.
Quite right. Next question. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session. Wonderful having you, Bharat Gupt ji. I think we had a very productive discussion, and thank you to all viewers. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Namaskar.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.